Hello, ELIC 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming with Lyric Winnick. We are continuing in Chapter 5, Language Barriers, and we are at the bottom of page 104, way down here at the bottom, where Winnick poses a question. She asks, "What is the biggest challenge for you when it comes to spoken language?" Jory: most people learn a language by hearing it from the time they are babies. It is as if their brain does this weird thing and bam, all of a sudden they start babbling, making sounds, and speaking. And then they can speak English or French or whatever language is spoken where they grew up. Babies who grow up in bilingual households can usually speak both languages. It's a natural, ingrained process. There is no other method of communication that they would have been better off using instead. But for me, that's not the case. Everyone in my family, Mom especially, tried to communicate with me, but the progression had to occur on my end. I had speech therapy, which I don't remember, and I had Mom, who became a verifiable expert in Jory speak. She could get through to me for what I needed to understand. My progression was the reverse. I had to gain control of my mind to be able to devote more effort and thought and energy to the communications bridge. In order to use words, I needed a parallel growth between my capacity to communicate and my willingness and ability to communicate. In my case, ability was more important than willingness because I was always willing to communicate with Mom, even if I wasn't very good at it. It was a very slow, incremental progression. Mom was more or less constant in her ability to communicate with me. It was me having to learn that as I got better control of my mind and the energy available, then I could expend more effort in figuring out how do I translate this thing that I have in my brain into the medium that everybody else is using, which is language. But I still struggle with the translation. From my perspective, when it comes to language, a huge chunk is missing. One of the worst parts is the ambiguity, how one word can mean several different things in different scenarios, or how the same word can be pronounced differently, such as live, as in to be alive, and live, as in appearing now. Actually, I got those backwards, such as live as in to be alive, and live as in appearing now, or wind for the breeze, and wind for a watch, or tear as in cry, and tear as in rip. And both words mean something different as a result. One word can mean up to 3 or 4 different things, depending on how it is used, like bark for a dog, or bark orders, or bark on a tree, or a bark, which is a type of ship. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary alone, there's going to be a couple of listings. And then if you think about the context, that could create another set of listings. And then if you think of the inflection and the syntax and the tone of voice, that's like 3 or 4 or 5 more shades of meaning or different meanings that you're adding for each individual word. It's horribly complicated. There should only be one word, one meaning. Instead, I wonder why we even use words to describe something in the first place. Plato tried to use forms to communicate. You have no idea how much I agree with that sometimes. To me, words aren't complex, they are reductionist. Even hearing somebody say something actually does not help me in the way it does for other people. Most people listen to somebody speaking, and they are basically sure they understand what that person thought. Well, for me, there's no hope of that. Hearing a person say something can actually provide me with less information. Most people, when they hear a language they understand, probably can understand more than 50% of what the other person is thinking. I do think many people assume they are better at listening and understanding than they actually are. They make a lot of mistakes. For me, it's not abysmal. It's not like 10%. But whatever you say, I have to translate into my own way of visual thinking and then translate it back again into language if I want to respond or add an idea. Each time I have to jump back and forth. I'm better now than I used to be simply because I've had more practice. I make that translation jump by comparing what I've heard in other instances. So I'll think, I'm pretty sure that person means this, because in these other scenarios, this was close enough. But I recognize that my baseline understanding is almost always going to be less than 50%. If I just try to wing it, if I don't put in some very hard work, I'm going to be wrong a majority of the time, where most other people are going to be right. Communicating using email or text isn't better for me either. In that sense, I'm similar to other people. Seeing the other person speak gives you information, and the more useful things you have, the better, I guess, even if it's only marginally useful data. Someone can send me a text message that expresses an emotional concern, and I won't pick up on it. I won't recognize it, and I definitely won't respond to it. Given that Jory doesn't like language and his brain is not wired for words, how did he develop his language skills? The answer is years of speech therapy and practice. But, as we discussed, using language and being comfortable with using language are two very different things. Fundamental to Jory's communication with the outside world is his translation process, taking the concepts embedded in his Jory beads and trying to put them into words that can be understood by everyone else around him. His facility with language is also directly linked to his environment and his amount of mental energy. Jory. Answering when I got comfortable with language is a tough question, because one of the ways that autism affects me is that not only do I have to translate between what's in my brain and the language, but there's also this bit where if I'm in an environment where autism has more strength, such as a place with a lot of people, noise, and distractions, then I'm less capable of doing that translation. That area of my brain is reduced or slowed down in some way. If I'm in an environment that I really do not like, especially a new environment, I may not have all of my vocabulary available. I may speak slower. It may take me longer to process thoughts in a language way. I will have to think, what am I trying to say? And how do I say that? And then say it. I think more slowly as well. All of that is slower than normal and takes more energy. In a comfortable environment, or one that I have been in before and is more familiar, I don't have much of a delay at all in terms of thinking about what I want to say, how to say it, and saying it. It's still me, but my language ability is substantially different between those two environments. In terms of environment, I had to start out at the bottom of the curve. I could only deal with a few people, the people in my family, and then, over time, one friend, one neighbor, then my older brother Tyler's girlfriend. It was introducing one new person at a time. In the beginning, I really couldn't communicate with anyone beyond my family and my friend down the street, James, and Miss Nancy, who lived across from us. Homeschool was also really the bottom of the curve. I needed the space and time that Mom provided to develop. Once I was able to do that, Mom began to push me, adding small numbers of new people. She started in late middle school because she thought that I was ready. I certainly didn't agree at the time, but now I look back and think that I was ready. It was similar to occupational and physical therapy, and probably speech therapy, which I don't remember. A lot of those therapies were predicated on making me do things that I specifically did not want to do. Mom strongly encouraged me to go to youth group and tennis lessons. I also started going to day club, which is like a homeschool cooperative, and I took British literature and math. But one thing that particularly stands out is Shakespeare Club. That was big for me because not only was I communicating, but I was communicating as a character, which gave me a lot of practice. I wasn't a great actor, but I could memorize the lines really well. In a costume, you can pretend you're somebody else. One of my favorite parts was being in the traveling band of misfits in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the people who stage the play and can't get anything right. I could do crazy stuff, and everyone was laughing. Acting or public speaking in front of a group is much easier for me than being in most groups. Because on stage, you're not really having a social interaction. The audience is there, but you don't have to respond to the audience in the same way that you would in a large social group where everybody's milling around, and you have to pay attention to multiple people's body language. And it's hard to hear conversations, for me especially. When you're a public speaker, you don't receive much facial feedback. It's vocal feedback, applause or boos or murmurs of agreement. I find that easier than most people. I find that easier than most people probably would in comparison. Well, maybe I should do things like join the Marine Science Club, which my faculty advisor, Jean, had helpfully suggested. Sophomore year, that's what I did. It was great. I really enjoyed it. By junior year, I started doing things without having them be suggested. I did them on my own at a ridiculous pace. It was that kind of progression. The journey started pretty late, but it occurred. From starting at the bottom of the curve, today I'm able to interact with completely different people. I can handle more types of people, more strangers, more environments. It's not totally destabilizing. And we'll stop there for now.